Welcome back to AI Norman, my little podcast situation. Today I was joined by Joelle Espute, who is the program director of Normal Anomaly Initiative. She's also currently a board member of the Houston LGBTQ Political Caucus and the Algo QPOC, and serves on the She serves on the Yale CIRA Community Advisory Board. She's like an activist person. She's trying to help make things good for trans people. And so she had some kind of PR person reach out to me and ask if we could have a conversation, because in Texas, they've been changing things about what you can do with your gender marker or your sex marker on your IDs. So she has an interesting tale to tell and some updates to give on anyone. Updates to give about what's going on with that. So we had a really interesting conversation because I also, want trans people to be able to live their lives with dignity and be able to make changes that they should be able to make to their paperwork. But I have some questions, and I really tried to play devil's advocate and steel man the oppositional things, and also just come up with maybe compromise ideas. I'm always just trying to come up with what makes the most sense and can still be as kind to everyone. So we went back and forth. We definitely had some kind of disagreements, but I thought we did a good job of really keeping it chill and always kind of exploratory and really hearing each other. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and I was funnier than I have been for the last couple of weeks, I will say, because I took a little bit of an edible this time, which is what I think I need to do. Is there anything wrong with that? Yeah, no, I just think I need to take 5 to 8 milligrams before these things, or else I'm too serious. And sometimes I think I need to get all the way sober from that, and I was even thinking about going to MA, which apparently exists. But I think what it is maybe I do too much at night and should only do stuff before podcast. I don't know. I really like edible. Is it? What if I'm not working as hard as I should be? Because on the edibles, I feel like everything's okay, even though everything's definitely not okay. But everything will also never be all the way okay, no matter what. And I think I'm moving along in life. Anyway, I really enjoy edibles. And I really enjoyed this conversation. So hopefully you'll join me for the whole thing. Get into it. I really think that it was a cool conversation for exploring these issues in a way. If you're one of those people like me who's not a hateful bigot, but also has some questions and wants things to be logical, join me for this, because I think we did a great job. What have you done today before this?
So today, our organization is heading to New Orleans for a conference and for our media tour. But it's interestingly enough, there is a tropical storm that is kind of heading through Texas and Louisiana in the direction that we're flying. So literally right after this, I'm going to head to the airport to I moved up my flight so I could try to beat the storm.
Yeah, he'll be just ahead of the storm in the sky.
That's what I'm trying to get. People are all, and the storm is just supposed to last through tomorrow night. So, and my flight was actually tomorrow night. So,
okay. So you just get there early.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm like, okay. So I moved my flight up, and I was like, I just am going to hopefully I chanced it, good, and I can make it, and then I'll have an extra day in New Orleans, which I'm very excited about.
Nice. I was actually just in New Orleans last weekend, doing comedy and stuff, but it was raining there every day. I think it's raining. I don't know if it's raining season.
It's been raining here on and off because we're in the middle of hurricane season. I think we're at the high point of hurricane season. So it's so interesting because they were talking about how there haven't really been many hurricanes. We had one Hurricane Burl. But then they were like, oh, there hasn't been any hurricanes. And then boom, we get a tropical storm. So it's oh, okay. And of course it is hitting right when we are all supposed to be flying in for this really major conference. So it is causing a lot of chaos behind the scenes, but
And it's named
Oh, so
Burl?
this hurricane is Hurricane Francine, but the last
Oh,
one that
okay.
hit us was Hurricane Burl.
Burl? Like
Mhm.
Berle kind of Burl? Oof. It's like, have they run out of names? What is
These names are
that?
so interesting, and it was like it was kind of a like big deal. Like power was out. Some people lost power for like weeks.
You mean in Houston?
I mean,
Yeah, no, I remember
my
that.
power was out for two
Hmm.
days. I mean, it was there was substantial damage.
Yeah, no, I go to Houston often enough. I didn't really get caught up in that. I have family in Houston, but they were all like in Katy and Richmond. They're fine. But I know every time I would go to Houston, every couple of weeks I would be in Houston doing comedy. And for at least like a month and a half, the comics would get up there and do hurricane jokes. So it's one of those where it must have been a big deal if even weeks after comics are still doing their
Oh
little
yeah, it's still. I
bit
mean, they
about
are
it.
still. Weather is definitely a big thing in Houston and Texas, and or Texas likes to not have any sort of federal oversight. So we have our own power grid. So when the power went out, it took weeks to fix, and it was such a disaster. And
Yeah.
like there's still like literally there are still buildings. Like there's a hotel near NRG Stadium literally that has a side of it just completely gone, and
Gone.
it's still
Oh,
gone.
cool. Wow. Just the chunk is
Hmm.
taken out of the side. That's so cool. I've never been part of a storm where like near a part where that happened. I have a friend who lives in Tennessee, but like a few years ago, his entire roof was blown
Oh wow.
off, which I thought was like something only from the movies. Like you literally went upstairs and it was just like, oh, the roof's gone. Cool.
You know what I
I mean,
so
terrifying.
right before my power went out, or actually right when my power went out for Hurricane Burl, um, so I was trying to like go outside because it had just started raining, and I was like, oh, I need to try to move my plants in. I went outside. It was raining so hard you couldn't even see outside. Like it was just rain and wind.
Cool.
Literally, I couldn't even see to the patio across like the way from me. And so I ended up having to come back in, and I was like, I don't care. And then
Fuck thing
I was
plants.
like looking out the window, and it looked like something from a window, and I was like, I hope I don't like die. It's like kind of beautiful and scary. Like it's
Yeah.
like the way it looked like a tornado, like whatever a tornado looks
Yeah.
like in Twister or a movie, but it was like you couldn't even see, I couldn't even see like maybe 3 feet out. Like it was just so much wind and rain.
Yeah, see, I grew up in Houston, so like I kind of took all those really awesome storms for granted because we had them, fairly often, even though I was lucky enough to never have too much damage to where I lived. But I know I dated someone from California who was always so amazed to see just even a lot of rain and like thunder and everything, like, because I don't think California seems to get that much of this crazy
The
weather,
worst
right?
that like I miss the weather in California. The worst that California gets is like a heat wave. Like right
Right.
now they are complaining because it's like 102, 105. And I was like, well, like we had like 20 days of 100 plus degree temperatures. Last year we had like over a month stretch of like 100
It was,
temperatures.
I remember last summer, it was like 3.5 months of 105 degrees every
It was
day.
it
I
was and I
mean,
think it was so hot that I just got used to it. Like I'm used to it
yeah.
now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That'll break you in. All right. So what have you come to tell us about today?
So I wanted to kind of talk about these new heinous policies, this DPS policy that was released to the public August 21st, which actually led to another policy from Texas Vital Statistics. But these transphobic policies that are being targeted towards the trans community. So I wanted to give some context. So August 20th, there was a memo sent out to Texas Department of Public Safety regarding state issued driver's licenses and IDs. And the policy stated that they were no longer amending gender on an ID or a license, regardless
Hmm.
of a court order or an amended birth certificate. And so they sent the policy out quietly on the 20th. And then on the 21st, it got leaked to the public. And so they weren't answering any questions. They weren't clarifying anything. All they said was they were questioning the validity of the court orders from our Attorney General, Kim Paxton. And so what they also said was any request that came in, they were one, denying, and two, they would be sent to a private listserv to kind of keep a running list of who's requesting to have their gender amended. To add further context, in 2022, Ken Paxton actually requested a list of all of the transgender people that changed their gender through Texas DPS, and they did not comply, not because they didn't want to. They said that their system couldn't pull that information just because
their computers are so ghetto.
They're so ghetto and old, and like there's no single option that says you are changing this because you're trans. And so this is kind of their back way to, one, stop it, and then two, to also try to start that running list of trans people that he previously wanted.
Okay, so this is all happening because of a Ken Paxton order?
So
there wasn't like a law?
So it's not a law yet, I believe, okay. Or what, if we look at other states that have like done similar things, then they are going to propose legislation to kind of codify this. So it's not a law yet. It's just simply a policy. So DPS said that they are no longer amending gender. Now they'll still change names. They will amend your gender if it was a clerical error on their part. But they will no longer amend gender, even with a court order, even with an amended birth certificate. And then what happened is Texas Vital Statistics came out less than 2 weeks later and said that they actually are no longer amending birth certificates. So they both.
And is that because of a Ken Paxton thing? None of this is bills.
None of it is bills yet, but it is. I think it is fueled by Ken Paxton, but it is fueled by Ken Paxton's anti-trans like legislation that he's trying to push. This comes on the heels of banning gender-affirming care for trans youth. They also are trying to ban trans people, trans adults, from using Medicaid and Medicare for their care. So this is kind of on the heels of that, of all of this anti-trans legislation that they're trying to pose.
Okay, so it sounds like right now this stuff is all coming from just people deciding in their committees or their whatever, like this is what we're going to do or not. How long has it been that people have been able to change their gender marker on their licenses?
I mean, it's been at least a couple decades. So it's been a long while since people have been able to change it.
What was the policy until 2 weeks ago, I guess? What was the policy? Like, how did you go about changing? Have you changed your gender marker?
I have. So the policy is actually...
Okay, so how did that go?
It's actually not... It's very similar to changing your name. So if you want to legally change your name, like let's say you get married and you want to legally change your name, it's actually the exact same process. You apply for a court order to do your legal name change. So once the court approves it, then you use that court order with the stamp from the court to then go to all of the necessary departments to change your name through those departments. So you would go to the Social Security office, you would go to DPS, you would go to, if you wanted to amend your birth certificate, you also use that to apply or change your name on your passport. So you use that court order to then file for your name change throughout the various forms of identification or things like your credit cards and stuff that you may use.
Okay, because I remember I've gotten gay married and gay divorced a couple times and changed my name and while you're at it with one of, and so I remember it being a really annoying kind of wild goose chase paperwork kind of a thing where you think you have what you need and then they tell you, no, you got to go across town and get this notarized by this person and then photocopy this 3 times, all that. So, but then when...
No. I was going to say, so yes and no. So it can be that experience, but it can also be a pretty smooth experience. I think there are a lot of organizations that help out with the process that kind of help you kind of navigate it to where it's a little smoother. But it can be annoying.
Right. Yeah. Like, so if you know what you're doing, you won't have to double back like I did a couple times. And yeah. Okay. And so, but then when we got to the place where, like I was getting a divorce and changing my name at the same time, it was just a matter of saying to the judge, this is what I want. The judge saying, are you sure this is what you want? And I said, yes. And then she changed it for me. So when it comes to changing your gender marker, is there anything that you had to do, like in terms of showing that you had transitioned or that you had, because it used to be, I remember to transition, there were all these psychologist letters and all this. So I'm kind of wondering, like, is there any extra process to kind of show that you have transitioned?
So there is. So the process of transitioning, it's different for every trans person. I like to think that transitioning is a lifelong process. But there are some legal things that you have to do, some extra steps that you have to take. You do have to get a letter from your doctor, not from a psychiatrist, but you do have to get a letter from your doctor stating that they support you changing your gender. And then you have to get fingerprinted just so that way, it's not you evading, the federal, officers or anything. But that's it. It's, just a couple of extra steps that you have to take.
Okay, but those were the gates in place. Was you needed a letter from a doctor saying, yeah, this person has transitioned or is trans or something, and then you fingerprint. So in case you're really trying to escape the law. Okay, and so then you just took that to the judge, and then the judge would just change it for you. And the same thing for your birth certificate. Is it the same as for your driver's license?
So with the birth certificate, so you take it and you can take it to the judge first, or you can do everything online now because, God bless COVID, but now we can do everything online. But once you get that court order from the judge, you actually use that to then file for a new amended birth certificate. So the same way that you would file for like a new Social Security card or anything like that. Like it's the same way with your birth certificate.
Okay. Wow, you can do this all online now?
You can.
Or you could?
Actually can do most of it online.
What? I should have waited a few years to get divorced. That was a headache, but okay. Wait till COVID. It's so funny all the times that we're now like, thank God for COVID. I mean, whatever. But okay. We can buy alcohol and take it home from restaurants now and things. Okay, so now they're not letting anyone change their gender markers on any of the official documents. And if you apply to do it, you'll be put on some kind of list, which is interesting because I could kind of see an argument before when it was like, hey, we want to have a list of everyone who has, in case something comes up and we need to make sure we know who this is or something. But then if you're saying we're going to deny them changing it and we're going to keep a list of them, it's like, well, why? If you're not letting them change it, then why the list? What's that for? Can you think of any reason why?
No one knows. And he also isn't stating why he wanted the list in the past and why they're keeping this new list. Like there is no rhyme or reason, because part of it is you have to go through those extra steps to like verify that you don't have any like warrants or any legal stuff going on, but you go through steps to verify everything. So as far as like a list, the list doesn't even make any sense because you still have your same social, like everything else is still the same.
Oh yeah, the social's all the same. Okay, so this doesn't like change people who have changed their gender marker. It still stays like it's not going to revert back, right?
No. And luckily, DPS's system is so raggedy that they couldn't possibly revert it back, even if they wanted to.
Yeah, good point. Okay. So our country's too incompetent to have lists of people. I love that. We don't have the German efficiency, thank God. So, okay. So can you try to steel man for me? Like, give me the best argument for why we, as a society, as a state, would not want to let people change their gender marker?
It's transphobia, honestly, because it doesn't harm anyone. It literally has nothing to do with the next person. It's literally the same or similar process as changing your name or amending your name, because if we can change our name literally as many times as you want, then what is the argument for changing gender? There is no argument other than it's clear transphobia, because to say that, well, we are not going to allow you to change your gender, but we're still allowing people to change their name, means that this policy is clearly targeted towards a specific group of people, which is trans people. But there really isn't an argument to say, oh, you all should not change your gender, because it really has nothing to do with anyone, and it's such a harmless process that really is to affirm the identity of the trans person. So it really has nothing to do with anyone else.
Okay. So how about this? Like, so on our driver's license, it says gender, right? Or does it say sex or gender? Do you know?
I actually don't know.
Should we look at? Let me just grab mine.
Mike, I need to pull mine out.
Oh yeah. Wait. I don't. Where does it say it at all? Oh, it says sex. Yeah, it says sex. So, like, what? I mean. So I can see, because like sometimes people use the word sex and gender synonymously. Other times we use them differently. And it kind of all depends on your politics, but not even necessarily in a neat left-right kind of way. Like, how do you tend to use the word gender?
I use gender and sex interchangeably. I think that people are assigned a sex at birth based off of the people who are assigning it based off of their perception, based off of how they identify the newborn person. But I think of them interchangeably because it is very much a nature nurture thing. And I use gender because gender has to do with how a person identifies. It's not what is assigned to them. Gender is how a person identifies. A person can be assigned male at birth, but they may identify as a woman. So they may be a trans woman, or they may even be intersex. But those sorts of things aren't known. And I think what happens is we live in a society of absolutes. We live in a society of concrete ideas and concepts. And so we think of identity as a concrete concept, which there are parts of our identity that are very concrete. Race, while race is a social construct, it's still also concrete. But gender is not as concrete. While there are people that are assigned female at birth that still identify as a woman as an adult, there are still a number of people that might have been assigned one thing at birth, but when it comes to their gender identity as they are going through their life, they may identify or present a completely different way. And I think because our society is so set on these concrete constructs that we don't allow space for people to identify how they choose and then navigate that process how they need to be able to live an affirmed life.
Yeah, but it does seem like you are using the word gender sometimes differently than sex, because you're talking about like gender identity and how different that can be, as opposed to sex, which it's assigned at birth based on the appearance of genitals almost always. I don't think anyone ever runs like any tests other than that. It's just like, oh, does that look like a penis or a vagina? Okay. And then sometimes at puberty, it turns out, oh, you had some kind of DSD. And so actually now biologically, all of the male hormones are going to flood in, even though you had what looked like a vagina, or, all kinds of various things can happen there. But so still there is like a sort of male biology of how much you're masculinizing, in utero and from then on with testosterone and stuff. And then there's like the female biology that, there is that, whether they observe it correctly or not, or whether they observe it, but there are complications with that person. There is that reality. And then there's the reality of your gender identity, your self-conception. I would even say sometimes your sexed self-conception, and those can be quite different, of course. And especially with gender, it's beyond a spectrum. Like, I don't even know if spectrum's right, because that sort of implies one into another, whereas it's kind of more of like a whole universe. And then, but with sex, we have two binary reproductive categories of like organized to create small or large gametes. But then even then we have a lot of variation in how your phenotype expresses. And sometimes we have all kinds of DSDs. So like, I could see a world where people would argue maybe we could have sex and gender identity on your driver's license. And then you could say like, okay, so then your sex would be male and your gender would be woman or something. But then I know that people would argue about that because they don't really feel like sex being male really feels right. And so because I was thinking about this before we talked, and I was like, I could see like maybe for medical reasons, if someone is just looking at the ID when you're coming into the hospital unconscious and no one's with you, I could see that being a case where like we do need that some information, so maybe it could be kind of like, and I'll back up and say like, for me, like I'm female, but I don't really identify with that. Like I feel like a dude kinda, but I also don't, I have some body dysphoria, gender dysphoria stuff, but I don't have so much that I am sure that I want to transition and take on all of that. And there's certain things I like about my female brain stuff, especially. And, so then I wouldn't really want to have like my gender put on my driver's license, because my gender identity is, to me, it's like kind of my business. Like I actually don't like being public too much, because I have to explain this long-winded thing. Like it's not as simple for me as saying like man, woman, non-binary. And so like, I wouldn't want that either. So I'm thinking like, what if we did it where your license like didn't put your sex or gender on it at all? One, how about, why do we even need that on a driver's license?
I actually agree. It's not needed. I actually agree.
Right. So to me, it's either get rid of that altogether, or if people are sure that we need it for certain occasions, like again, maybe for your medical stuff, if some kind of horrible accident happens, or if it's like for legal reasons, or for if someone's trying to figure out whether a man or a woman should be the person to frisk you, something where they need to know and they're not sure. What if you're super androgynous and they don't want to ask you and they're like, what's this? Maybe like on the back, how on driver's license on the back, like it'll say like whether you need glasses or not. Mm-hmm. Or there's even a letter on the front that indicates it, but most people don't know it. And if a bouncer's looking at it or someone's looking at your ID, they're not going to be like, oh, they're not going to flash to that. But if there were like a little code and then something on the back that's like, this is a class C, there's like, these are the cars you can do. You can wear these glasses. This person, is F to M hormone HRT kind of thing. Something like that, where it would be like, here's the information, but it's on the back. It's in small print. Maybe you even have to know the code to even know what it means, so that the average person wouldn't necessarily, and it would certainly take them too long. It'd be too awkward for them to be studying this thing and being like, wait, is this person trans or what's, do you know what I mean? Like, I think that stuff makes more sense than like, why do we need to force trans people to have this thing that's not going to match what their presentation is at all? But then I see why some people are like, well, that's biologically untrue. And so we don't want to just put like this thing that's not exactly true when it's really gender and not sex that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, sorry. I know I kind of put out a lot of ideas.
I think that's a great point. So I want to make a parallel, because I love context and I love parallels. 100 years ago, society said that Black people were biologically not human, and they were 3/5 of a human. If we're talking 200 years ago. So 200 years ago, society said that Black people were biologically not human. We were 3/5 human. We didn't deserve rights. Not saying that this is the same, but I'm saying that it's a parallel. And I think what's interesting is that we have since moved away from that. Well, heaven forbid most of us have moved away from that. And what we've come to see was actually that's not true. That was due to extreme systemic racism that was at place. And I think that what we are dealing with is extreme, severe transphobia, and this internalized stigma and discrimination against people that exist outside of the binary system. Because I think what we are also seeing is that this binary system just does not work. And I think you explained it when you were talking about yourself and even talking about like why we use these antiquated boxes to identify ourselves. It just shows that this binary system doesn't work. 9 times out of 10, when people are looking at your ID, they're looking at your birthday and your name, and and maybe your race and your picture.
Right.
But like, as far as anything else, nobody even looks at your height. I mean, like your height and weight and stuff. But I think that when we think about gender and sex and this concept of sex and biological sex, which when we even think about biological sex, that is a westernized idea of biology, because in biology, sex is not in a binary. When we think about hundreds of species, their sex is not a binary. It is just when we come to humans, we have this strict construct of a binary biological sex system. And so I think what we are finding is that these gender norms and systems are antiquated, they're outdated, and we are butting heads with people that are refusing to move forward and think expansively about what we can do, because there is no valid reason why we should not allow people to change their gender. It doesn't harm anyone. And to say that you are questioning the validity of a court order when you don't question the validity of a court order to change someone's name. I've never heard that. You don't question other validity, like other types of court orders. So why are we only questioning the validity of a court order that changes gender? It's clear transphobia.
Right. Well, okay. So let me try to make the case for a couple of things that you said, because, well, changing your name we know that a name is a completely arbitrary thing for someone to change. Like it doesn't really reflect anything. It just kind of reflects, what we're going to call you. And, I used to make a joke about how I didn't think we should let Caitlyn Jenner be Caitlyn, because Bruce was born in 1949 and the name Caitlyn wasn't invented until 1989. So it's like, you can be Brenda or Joyce or something, but like Caitlyn, girl, And so I do think we should give people a hard time every now and then when they pick names that are outrageous. But legally, of course, you can change your name to anything because it's just a name. It doesn't reflect anything. But what sex was reflecting for a long time was at least what we thought that your biological category was, your reproductive category. And there are all these edge cases, and sometimes people got, their attempted observation and assignment wrong, or they didn't know the full extent of it. But like I said, when it comes to reproductive categories, we are a binary species, and most species are. There are some, like you said, who reproduce like asexually or somewhere, you can kind of change sexes depending on if we need more males or females in the place. But humans and mammals are like, we are reproductively binary species. And so there is some reality to biological sex and the realities of what testosterone does to a mind and body. And of course, these things exist on a spectrum phenotypically, so that there are some women who are stronger in some ways than some men, et cetera. But they're still like pretty distinct groups of people in terms of a number of traits. And so that's why I kind of say, like, if we could all just agree on the distinction between sex and then like gender identity or vibe or expression or roles or something, then I think it would be easier to have these conversations and say, well, you do have this biological sex, but then you also have your gender expression. And then also you can take your biological sex and change it to varying extents with varying kinds of HRT. And so you can be someone who was born biologically male, but then feminized yourself and demasculinized yourself as much as is healthily possible, or vice versa. And like, I can speak on all of those realities, but I can see why sometimes people wouldn't want to make it as if paperwork could change reality. And this came up with this Algerian boxer, right, who isn't trans, but who, if certain people are telling the truth, then has XY chromosomes and may or may not, depending on whatever DSD she would then have, may or may not have masculinized into a normal masculine, male amount, or just a little bit, or none at all, or somewhat partially, there's so many different kinds of DSDs it could be. But the IOC coming out and saying, well, she's female because her passport says it, kind of shows the problem here, where you go, well, it's not really a matter of paperwork whether someone has a male advantage in sports. And so it's those kinds of things. And I know it can feel frustrating that so many people care so much about the sports thing, but it pings on this really deep moral sense about fairness to a lot of people, and especially conservative people. Have you ever heard of Jonathan Haidt?
No.
He's an author. He's this moral, a moral psychologist, I think he calls himself. And he's been studying kind of the morality, and he calls them the moral taste buds of different people, and kind of figuring out that basically liberal people have a certain kind of moral sense. There's certain things that liberal people really care about morally, and there's other things that conservative people really care about morally. And liberal people are really concerned generally with care and not doing harm, and kind of the empathetic things of really wanting to be kind and help people, that kind of stuff. And conservative people have don't care about that stuff as much, famously, but they also care more about all these other parts of morality. And both liberals and conservatives care about fairness, but and reciprocity, but conservative people also care about that more, and certain kinds of these fairness things more. And so, and you can see conservative people also tend to like sports more than liberal people. And so I think there's this thing where there's this particular thing where men, especially cis men who have that sense of chivalry, can sometimes suddenly they care about women's sports, right? Now that they can protect us from the big bad trans people, now they're all of a sudden they care about women's sports. But there is this, I think, kind of more conservative impulse to think this kind of fairness is a big deal, and sports are a big deal. And so that's where I think that kind of stuff comes from, even though this it's a total edge case. And like I said, almost never, as you say, is it going to matter at all to anybody what your sex says on one of these IDs. But because people ping on those stories and they go, that is so unfair. And that means that if we can't, it drives people crazy to go, the paperwork is reality. Whereas there is this other reality, potentially, at least to Imana Khalif. We still don't really know. And I don't know who to believe about any of it. But if she does have XY chromosomes and she does have a DSD, then it's not as simple as, some paperwork says she's female, so therefore it's fair for her to play against cis females in women's sports. So that's the only thing I can think of, the sports, or I said, maybe some kind of medical situation where you need context in case they find your body passed out with just an ID and they're trying to figure out how to help. Those are the only two that I can really think of.
Sexual organs have to do with helping. I think that there's
Well, because I think sometimes medically there are times when you need to treat
well, you don't. If
female
I'm
bodies
passed
different than
out,
male
you don't
bodies.
need to pump my sexual organs to resuscitate.
Yeah.
I think
That's actually not the worst way to get someone to wake up. I don't know
I think that there is this weird obsession with bodies. Like, I think someone's physical anatomy is nobody else's business. It's nobody else's business. I think that there is this hyper focus on certain trans people, because it's not even all trans people. We talk about trans women in sports. We don't even talk about trans men at all. Trans men do exist. And I think that
Yeah, but they don't have an unfair advantage against
we
men.
don't
In
know
fact,
because
they
we
have
don't talk
they
about
have
we
a
don't talk
disadvantage.
about it. Like, we don't talk.
Well, we know because we know the numbers, and we know they have actually done studies on this. I've read it. So the like F to M's do gain more advantage than what M to F's lose. M to F's lose some of their strength, to put it as simply as possible. But not all of it. And there's certain things kind of like, because you have narrower hips or like kind of longer bones and things like that. If you went through puberty, if you went through masculinizing puberty. But so trans men don't have as much advantage. And so they're still disadvantaged when it comes to cis males. So that's why no one cares about that, because there's no advantage there. Whereas
no one talks about trans men, period. No one talks about
men. Well, I do.
No one talks about trans men going into restrooms. Nobody talks about trans men in sports. No one talks about trans men, period. And it's so interesting, this hyper focus on bodies and fairness and equity, when the same men that are talking about equity in sports literally are snatching rights from cis women left and right. So I think that there is this weird double standard when we talk about bodies and body autonomy and fairness. And I don't believe in fairness. For me, is a subjective construct. I think that it depends on who is empowered and influenced. They determine what fairness is. It will never be fair where there are systems of oppression and systemic systems of power that unfairly provide people with advantages or disadvantages. Fairness is not a thing. I believe in equity and equality. And I think that conservatives will talk about fairness with women as they are ripping away their reproductive rights. I think it's interesting to talk about reproductive rights when no one cares about reproductive rights when they're ripping them away or banning them or banning care. No one cares about reproductive rights. No one cares about bodies, literally. And I think that,
I do. But...
Well, I mean, I'm saying no one in the general sense. But I think that the only time people are focused on someone's body is when they are trying to take away their rights or take away their right to choose how they use their body or what they do with their body. And I think that what a trans person does with their body is their business, period. Just the same as what a woman does with her body is her business, period. I think that so long as it is not inflicting harm on her, on anyone else, or, on themselves, whatever that may look like, because that's also subjective, but it is no one's business. And I think too, you commented about people's gender or their sex on their ID is what you all perceive. It's not what I want as an adult. As an adult, as someone who pays taxes, as someone who is a grown-ass adult, I have every right to do with my body whatever I want and change whatever I want. And for someone to, or an entity to put a policy in place to prevent me from doing that is no different than 60 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when there were policies put in place that prevented people from doing basic things that affirmed their life. It's no different.
Well, see, this is why I think it doesn't really make sense. If everything you're saying is true, like, I just don't think it makes any sense to put sex on our driver's licenses in the
I
first
agree.
place. Because because I think it's like something where you're talking about being able to change it, like your name, just because you want to and you're an adult.
Well, it's
And it's
not
like,
because I
yeah, but
want to.
then,
It's not because I want to. It
mhm.
is to affirm who I am. And we have to go through extra steps and processes to change it. So it's like if I already have to
Yeah.
go through extra steps and processes and pay for it, it's no one's business, if I get fingerprinted, they run my fingerprints. I don't have a criminal background. I don't have anything. Then why then
Yeah.
what is the hesitation?
Well, this is why, because I don't really understand, because I don't think that your ID is supposed to be to affirm you. It's supposed to be a legal document for like important legal reasons. But it's like, what are the legal reasons that people need this? But although, because it's like, my ex-boyfriend who was trans, he changed. I remember he told me about changing his name and gender marker, and then while he was at it, he like added a couple of inches to his height, which I thought that's funny. So you're playing two truths and a lie with the DMV people here, but like you apparently can just put whatever height you want and your eye color then, and they're just going to write that down. I mean, I don't know if the people who work there are like, all right, we'll give you 2 inches, but if you say you're 6 feet and you're 5'4", we're, like we're going to say something. Like, I don't know how that goes, but it is strange because it's like, hey, if you're going to let people choose their height, then if all of this is just self ID anyway, apparently what we're putting on your driver's license, other than your name, which you have to show paperwork for, like, it is just strange. I just like, what is the point of the driver's license? And if it's that a cop needs to potentially know, then they could put a little QR code on there for cops to be able to scan to see how tall you are. Is that or the other? That's what I'm saying. I just like I can't agree that your ID is there to affirm you. Like it's
Oh,
supposed to be
so
some
let me
kind
say
of
this. Let
important
me
legal
ask you,
document.
are you trans?
Mhm. I don't consider myself trans, but I also don't really consider myself cis.
Okay, so as someone who is trans and as someone who does advocacy in the trans community, an ID does affirm you because
Oh, I'm not saying it wouldn't, but I'm saying I don't think that's the
well,
purpose
it's not the
of.
purpose. So I think there's a truth and a
Mm-hmm.
reality. The truth is it
Mm-hmm.
is not the purpose. And I think the truth and reality for everything work together, but they may not cross or overlap. But the truth is that's not the purpose. The purpose is it's a legal document. But the
Right.
reality is it does affirm you. It affirms your identity. And for many trans people, especially when we're living in a state like Texas, where they're banning our rights, they're banning our healthcare, we're being murdered, those sorts of things matter. And for someone who isn't trans, it doesn't matter what's on your ID because you don't like people don't care. You all don't care. Not saying you
Well, no,
don't
it
care.
would matter. It would matter if it said male on my driver's license. I think it would be because it is like I said. I am pretty androgynous, and I definitely get called every kind of gender word. And depending on what I'm wearing and how my hair is at the time, and all of that, and how much people are really looking at me, so there could be situations where people are looking at it and going and making a determination. I don't know. There could be a situation where anyone was like accosted in a restroom and asked for their like I don't know when it would really come up, and that's why I keep coming back to like I just don't know why we need this on a driver's license, because if we're going to use the word sex or if it's gender, like why would any of it be on there? The only thing I can think is that I remember, because yeah, I think if you're passed out and you're taken to the hospital, it's really, maybe it's not very likely that your endocrine system and what's going on with that is going to have to do with how they resuscitate you. I know certainly medically, males and females can sometimes very much need to be treated differently in terms of how much a dose to give someone. Even if they're the same size, sometimes you need to give females less. But then also that's going to be affected by whether you're on HRT. So then the doctor would also need to know that. So hopefully you're awake and you can talk to your doctor. I know there have been situations where trans men have gone to the doctor and like it says male on their ID and like they don't bring it up to certain kinds of doctors. And then if they're not getting certain kinds of checkups and the person really doesn't ever know that they're trans, then they might miss a pregnancy. I know that has happened a few times where people missed a pregnancy because they really didn't know they were trans. Or maybe the doctor didn't really understand that they might still get pregnant. They knew they were trans, but they thought, oh, they must be sterile, so we're not going to even check for this or something. I know that has come up some. That's like the only kind of thing I can think of. But even then, it still seems like almost always it's going to be a matter of that trans person needs to advocate for themselves and tell the doctor what's up.
Well, and also doctors need to know how to treat trans people. The onus is not always on trans people to fix systemic problems. Doctors should be able to treat trans people the same way that they treat cisgender people, the same way that they treat women, like doctors should know how to treat all patients. And I think what we're missing in that whole story is the blind spot of doctors, one, to be able to engage with clients that may or may not be trans, and that's the whole process, whether it is the intake form that, is inclusive, that's affirming, that asks the most important questions, or that's a doctor that is culturally competent to be able to engage, to be able to treat the patient. And I think it is not always on the trans person to, yes, we have to absolutely advocate for ourselves, and it's not always on us. It's on the doctor because
doctors always need to be better. And I mean, I would say generally the doctors in this country, it's scaring me how incompetent a lot of people are on every level and also corrupt. But I just mean, like if you're a trans person who like really passes, then you might need to let your doctor know that you are trans. If they're not looking at your genitals, or if they are and you've already done something about that, whatever. There could be a reason why you just need to let them know. But yeah, I mean, doctors not only need to learn more about how to treat trans people at varying, extensive transition, but also need to just learn how to treat women in general, because we only started studying the vagina about 15 years ago. Like there have all just decades and decades of studies where only male patients were used to figure out doses and protocols and things, treatment plans. And so now it's only been in the past like 2 or 3 decades that people have started going, oh, we might need to redo some of these studies with females. So it's like there's only one type of body that doctors still really generally know how to practice on. And then the rest of us, like they really do need to catch up and learn what other endocrine systems are going to need. So it is on the doctors, but also I don't know how to help fix that. How do we get doctors to really take seriously the health of non-cis men?
I think it's how do we
get
systems that are empowered to care about people that are non, cis men. How do we get them to care about anyone other than white, old, rich men? Because that seems to be the only thing.
Right. Yeah, so that's a whole different can of worms, the medical system and all that goes wrong there. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious if anybody, watching this wants to comment in the comments of like, why can you give any examples of why we need sex on an ID at all, or where it could go wrong if you have it be putting your trans sex and on there. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, like I said, it to me, like I'm always just like kind of a moderate looking for a compromise. And I'm like, if it's somehow important, if anyone has really good reasons why it's somehow important to have information about your biology on your ID, then how about we put it on the back, we make it so that there's a kind of code that cops and medical professionals can memorize that they need, so that there's a little thing on there that just says something so that all right, because I could see if we're gonna do that, it presumes that we need that information. So it would be like, all right, the letter G means this is a trans M to F who is not on hormones. The letter H means this is a trans M to F who is on blockers and estrogen. You know what I mean? I mean, something like that, where it's like, that would be the pertinent medical, legal information, but it's not there for public consumption. And it's on the back, like I said, whereas on the front, it'll say gender And then you can say male, female, and ideally, like, I want one of those prefer not to answer options. That's my favorite gender. Whenever they ask me in like a drop down, male, female, non-binary, and then prefer not to answer, ooh, I'll take that one. That is my gender. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, how would you feel about that kind of a system?
I think the first step is we have to normalize a non-binary system. I think that that's the first step, because I don't necessarily know if that's an answer, because that still it still doesn't solve the systemic issue of really how we have to normalize the trans identity. We have to normalize the non-binary identity. We have to normalize that there are people in our community and in our society that do not live in the binary. And I think once we normalize that, then I think we can begin to come up with a solution that makes sense. Because once we normalize that, then it doesn't matter whether, then changing your gender, it doesn't matter, because we are normalizing trans people. We are normalizing non-binary people. And I think until we normalize trans people and non-binary people, then we will still keep running into, because there will be problems with changing that, because we're still not normalized. It's still just, it's not solving the problem, it's just moving it to the back. So I think we have to normalize people's identity and let people have autonomy over their identity, because it is not anyone's business what my identity is, or what, how I choose to affirm it's not anyone's business.
Well, that's why I say it doesn't need to be on the card. If it's no one's business, then that's like everyone's business
card.
Reality,
but the truth is it is on the card. And so we are working with the cards that we're being dealt. So because it is on a card, I went through the steps. I went to the correct steps. It's nobody's business why I'm doing it or how, because I already went through the state, already went through, the feds to change what I needed to change. So it's nobody's business. It's nobody's business. And I think once we start going there, it starts getting a slippery slope, because I don't think people would like it if the government started to tap into the intersections of their identity and started to police it. And I think that is where...
what would that look like?
Well, we're already policing body autonomy and reproductive justice. So...
Yeah, but you're talking about identity.
So I'm talking about different identities. So we're talking about trans identities now, but, what if the same thing could be said to, and I love analogies, if this was 100 years ago, how would people feel if on their identity it said former slave? And slavery is over, but it said former slave. And slavery's been over. And it's actually nobody's business that they were a former slave decades ago. But their identity, because they lived through slavery, their identity said former slave. There would be outrage. But it's nobody's business that...
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Then I would just argue, take that off the card. Why are we putting that on the card? So that's why I'm like, if anything that is nobody's business shouldn't be on an ID card.
But, and I agree. However, this is where we are. Like, it is on the ID, the reality.
Yeah. Well, so that's the other why I also say maybe on the front, get rid of sex, but just put gender. Because what you're talking about, like being affirmed and also being able to express a non-binary identity potentially. Right now, it's still FM. And in some states, I know you can do an X. But even then, like, I don't really identify as non-binary either. So like, that's why I'm like, I would rather, if it's the everybody's business part, then, okay, gender, and then you can choose M, W, N, NA, something, whatever you want to put, GF, something like that. Yeah.
I think we should.
And then do we make it open-ended, or do we give a list of 12 options, including other?
I think we extend the options. I think that it should not be so concrete. I think an option to amend it would be to extend and create more options so that more people can be represented. Because the reality is this information is needed for whatever reason. They're not taking it off. So how can we fix it so that we are not targeting and criminalizing and banning certain people's identity legally in states. And I think that there's nothing wrong with extending and opening up the options.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's where I'm going to come down on this. Gender on the front, let people, give them a list because it'll be cute because it needs to be short and compact for our little IDs. So you can do M, W, NB, NA, OTH, maybe we can come up. I don't know if we need to do soft demi boy or whatever, but we'll have some basic ones and then other and let people do that and then, like I said, if there are good reasons why it needs to say, because then you would, yeah, like even with the sex right now, like if you're an intersex person with a complicated condition, no one's going to get that from it just saying F to M on your, so it's already a problem. If it matters, then we're already getting it wrong. If it matters what your biological sex is or was assigned at birth or anything, we're already getting it wrong. So then if we need that at all, we already should do something where we're putting slightly more information, maybe on the back, if we need it at all. But if we don't need it at all, just put gender on the front, let people choose. Have we solved it?
I agree.
All right. There you go. We solved more of the world's problems today. Do you have any final thoughts on this or just like anything else that you want to share that this conversation has made you think of?
I think that people always seem to have these far out left field explanations of why bans happen or these crazy policies happen. But coming back to normalizing trans people, 98% of trans people or non-binary people or anyone that is going through their life are just normal people. These crazy, wild stories are just that. A lot of them are stories or fiction or things that you have not even experienced yourself. But one thing you might have experienced is just a regular trans person that is trying to live their life and be affirmed and just live a life. And I think that if we stop leaning into the sensationalism, the objectifying of trans people, this alienizing them and making them these foreign alien creatures, and literally just understanding and knowing that trans, non-binary, and gender diverse people are your neighbors, are in community with you, and they deserve the same rights as you have. And also understanding that as we continue to criminalize and ban and take away rights of communities that are at the margins, whether it's trans people, whether it's reproductive justice, it won't stop. It'll continue. And so we really have to be careful about the slippery slope of policies that ban or dictate how and who people are.
Yeah, no, and I think, like you say, like most trans people are just people who are trying to live their lives in peace and that if you knew them, that you would like them and stuff. I think what would help with the PR is like, there's some of these crazy trans people, like on TikTok especially and whatever, like, who are just really out there and just like really want attention. Just TikTok. There's a lot of crazy people of every gender on TikTok, but some of the craziest ones wind up getting amplified by whether it's libs of TikTok or this, that, or the other. And I'm like, there's a lot of people who are kind of like, if not hate watching and following, but then like kind of enjoying the tea of it all, the kind of sitting back with their popcorn and watching the crazy. We need to stop following and giving attention to the wildest, craziest people of any group on the internet. Just don't follow. I mean, I enjoy watching that stuff a little bit too sometimes, but I always take it in when like other people are talking about it. I'm like, but who are these people who were following these people? Who are these people who are, some of them faking it where they're going, you go girl, like you're so beautiful and stunning, when they're clearly like schizophrenic and have this narcissistic problem that the internet has amplified and that then other people can use to show how crazy trans people are. I'm like, some of these people following them in the first place, like I think are telling themselves they're doing a good job because they're telling a trans person they're beautiful, but they're really just enabling a mentally ill person who is making trans people look bad.
Well,
do you know what I'm talking about?
I can't speak to that. I can't because I don't follow those people. But I think that there are those types of people in every community. We can absolutely say that there are crazy, maniacal right-wing conservatives. We can say that there are extra crazy, far left, liberal, hippie people. So I think that can speak to any group. I don't want to speak to the mental capacity of anybody. And I can't speak to the mental capacity of any trans person on social media. But what I can say is I think that social media in general is always about sensationalism. Though, of course, those personalities are uplifted. And I think that there's space and time for that. But also, it's knowing that just as everyone else leads their ordinary life, there are trans people and non-binary and gender diverse people that lead ordinary lives as well. We are not just the sensations. And I think that if you or anyone else see someone that shares identities with you and you're like, that's not me. I don't identify with this dramatized, sensationalized caricature of my identity, then we have that right too. And I think that sometimes we don't get that right. And so I just want to extend that. There absolutely is space for them because there's space for everyone, so long as they're not harming anyone. Sure. And there are people that are still just regular, mundane people.
Right. Now, and I think that's important for everyone to always remember whenever you're seeing anyone of any demographic or group, just remember that that's someone who really wanted attention online, probably, and that everybody of every group we all have those people. And if you don't know 10 more of those people in real life, then please don't form stereotypes based on that person. But yeah, I have that problem with anything, not just with trans people, but just like, I can't stand that people are following, like anyone who does the hate follow or the like cringe follow of people. I'm like, yeah, but you're encouraging this person because now they know their audience wants that. I mean, there's these people who have like died because they mukbanged so much and their audience like goaded them on, and then they die at 32 of a heart attack. And you're like, guys, don't follow that. Why would you follow that? So that's all I mean is like, if people, like, as much as we blame content creators, like content consumers also have like a moral responsibility in who we give that attention to, because we pay our attention. That is like the number one commodity is our attention. So if you're paying attention to something, you're literally encouraging it.
It's a bi-directional relationship. And I think that people don't understand that. So, I know that is some people's thing. And, I let them. I don't follow it. I don't even see it most of the time. But I do think that people have to understand that no one community or group is a monolith, and that includes trans people. And a lot of times trans people are presented as a monolith, but we're not. We are there. We span the spectrum of identity just the same as any other group.
Yeah, there's even Trump trans people now.
There are.
Yeah. We knew what would happen one day. So here it is. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joelle. I really enjoyed that conversation and thoughts on this because, yeah, I know the laws are always changing about these sorts of things. And it's hard to keep up with quite where they are or who's to blame for what in Texas. But I hope that we can at least build up some public awareness about what's going on. Because I know there's plenty of people out there who have certain kinds of concerns or questions about the trans stuff, but that are also like good-hearted people who maybe even know a trans person or two, and they're not really sure what the laws are, what's going on. And they're like, well, yeah, but we definitely want adults to be able to live their lives in a reasonable way. We don't want the law coming in, because there's a lot of people who you have like one concern and then all of a sudden the Republicans are going, we're going to ban them all. And you're like, well, that's not what we were saying. We were saying we had a question about, children or something, but we're not talking about banning them, so I wish that we weren't in this polarized culture of it's either California or Mississippi, like there's somewhere, like I wish that we could have more of an understanding of like hey, it doesn't have to be so black and white. Like it's not, you're not pro-trans or anti-trans. You know, everything gets labeled this way. You're pro-life or pro-choice. There's always two. And, you know, I don't know what's wrong with our, like maybe it's just the two-party system leads to that because then they can kind of like manipulate us.
It's the innate nature of our society to have a binary system, whether it's, you know, everything is a binary. It's pro, you know, pro, anti, you know, to system. It's, you know, that it's the innate nature of our society.
Yeah, I think we need to get to, let's just officially do 3 parties. That might solve more problems than we realize. But there's a lot of people who have a lot of money invested in keeping it 2-party because that gives them a lot of power. So it's very hard to get them to change this. We're fucked. The rich people don't care about any of us.
They don't.
But if you're rich and you're listening to this and you care, do let us know. I have lots of uses for you. So, anyway, thanks so much, Joelle. Really cool. Yeah. All right. You what? Oh, yeah. And let us know. Is there anywhere you'd like to direct us to? Where can we find you online that you'd like to be found?
So the organization that I work with is called The Normal Anomaly. We're a Black queer-led nonprofit based in Houston, Texas. We do a lot of statewide and regional work in the South, centering Black LGBT people. You can find us at The Normal Anomaly on all social media platforms. If you want to find me in my, you know, personal life and my advocacy, you can find me as your man's first choice on all social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I'm Joelle Espew on Facebook. But yeah, thank you.
Sweet. All right. Thanks, Joelle.